This is a series of videos that tell the story of how my father and I came up with the four universal motions in physics. We highly recommend that you watch these videos in order. Enjoy. In our last talks, my father and I showed how we came up with the four universal motions in physics. And as my father and I started to think about these four motions, we came to a shocking conclusion from two completely different directions, that there's a second gravity. So my dad and I are each going to tell our stories about how we came to the conclusion that there's a second gravity. So let's listen to my father first.
Well, and what I was looking at is refraction, which is the picture you see there. And one of the questions I ask myself is, if the light's going to bend coming into the prism and then bend going out, there must be a force causing that to happen. It isn't going to just change because of the crystal. Although there's a Snell's law that gives into all that, but there has to be a force that causes the light to bend. So I then drew force arrows, one arrow showing the light bending as it comes in, which you see there at the bottom. Assuming the light's coming in at the bottom, that arrow causes the light to bend and then move through the crystal. And then since it bends leaving, there must be another force on the other end causing it to bend back. And then it occurred to me that, well, this can happen anywhere, not just where I happen to draw it. It could come in on left, right, top, bottom, all do the same thing. So there must be a force all the way around the prism that's sitting there waiting, if you will, to bend the light if it happens to come in at that point and then consequently leave at a different point. And when I drew that picture and you look at all those force arrows, it reminded me of another picture that I drew in the last 10 years. I've drawn this many times, where we have Newtonian gravity pushing the apple, if you will, to the earth, surrounding the earth all the way around in all 360 degrees, same as the prism. I said, well, that means that maybe this force on the light at the prism is a gravitational force. It looks the same to me. And what we did then was pursue the idea, through different examples, to show that, yeah, this is it's gravitational light, but it can't be the same as the Newtonian gravity, because the force around the prism is bending light, and light's moving at speed c, and gravity pushes the apple, and the gravity itself is Newtonian gravity, is moving at speed c. But still, it looks like there's both of these are gravity, but not the same one.
Yeah, this looks like a second gravity. It's interesting because I came to that same conclusion myself, but from a completely different direction. Thanks a lot, Dad. So how did I come up with the idea that there's a second gravity? Well, it all started when I read the book, The Universal Cycle Theory by Dr. Glenn Borchert and Dr. Stephen Poetz. And in it, Dr. Glenn Borchert talks about neomechanics. Neomechanics says there are infinite levels to the universe. That blew my mind. The idea that the universe has infinite levels all the way down and all the way up was simply so new to me that I ended up calling him and talking with him for many hours. Many years later, Dr. Glenn Borchert wrote a second book called The Infinite Universe Theory. That's where he concentrated on the idea that the universe was made up of different levels. And the way he looked at it is, we're at level 1, humans are level 1. Below us is level 2, where there are atoms. Below that is level 3, etc. Above us is level 0. Above that is level A. And at each level, you would have the same laws of physics. In this case, he said there was an ether at each level. An A1, an ether 1 at level 1, and ether 2 at level 2, etc. Ether is his theory and many other people's theory that light is a wave through a medium called ether. That's a different theory. My father and I do not subscribe to that theory. We think there's a lot of problems with it. But that doesn't matter. The most important thing here was I saw that there are infinite levels of the universe. Many years later, I thought about the same idea of the different levels of the universe. And I said to myself, well, the four universal motions have to happen at every level. They have to happen at level 1, level 2. And if we look at just gravity, the gravitic motion also happens at all levels of the universe. So let's concentrate on level 1 and level 2. Can we find anything in mainstream science that would give us a clue that the idea that there is a second gravity? So let's take a look at level 1 and level 2 orbiting. Gravitic motion, as we know, according to our model, is responsible for orbiting. So a planet goes around the sun, that's orbiting. So that must be a gravitic motion. An electron going around the nucleus, that also must be a gravitic motion. So we know again that gravity is a random motion. When you introduce two bodies in a gravitic motion, that those bodies come together. Do we have a force equation for gravity? At our level, at level 1, do we have a force equation? And yes, we do. We have Newton's equation, which says that the masses are inversely proportional to the radius squared, the distance between them squared times some constant. So we do. We have a force equation for a random field of particles, or a gravitic field. Random motions of particles create a force field that is what we call an inverse squared law equation. That's what this type of equation is called. So if we go back and we now say, okay, we've got an equation for gravitic motion. That equation is Newton's equation. It's an inverse squared law equation. Well, can we look at level 2 and find anything? Well, we know that the four universal motions say that orbits are caused by gravitic motion. Is there a known equation that describes the force that keeps an electron in orbit? One that already exists, something that doesn't worry about whether there's two gravities or not. And the answer is yes. Everybody who studies physics knows that Coulomb's law says that the force equation that keeps the electron in orbit around a nucleus is Coulomb's law, which is inverse square law equation. It's exactly the same form as Newton's equation. Everybody can see this, but they don't know why. But we can say why. Why is that? We can say that at level 1, we have gravity 1, and the equation is going to be an inverse square law, which is the masses are proportional to the radius or the distance squared times some constant. And that the electron going around the nucleus is also an inverse square law, which also then says if that force equation comes from a gravitic field. So that there is a gravity 2, much smaller, much faster, down a level, at level 2, which is the equation that is a gravitic equation, a force equation for gravity. That means at level 1 and at level 2, we have two different gravities. And the clue is that Coulomb's law is in the same form. So we have two gravitic fields. One is G1 particles that keeps planets going around the sun and comets curving around the sun. And we have a G2 particles, a second gravitic field, a second gravity that keeps a G1 particle or an electron going around the atom, and also G1 particles that can curve around these atoms. And this is going to be very important in the idea of electricity. So yes, we do have a clue that there's a second gravity. And so we can bring this up to what my dad was looking at, which is that light is bent through a prism. And if you look here, you can see here are waves of particles, like my dad says, that is light. They go in and they hit the atoms with nucleuses in the prism. Those have a gravitic field, a gravity 2, a second gravity that causes the light to bend around them. Just like these are comets going around suns, these are light particles, G1 particles at level 1, being curved by a second gravity below our level, and that makes the light curve. So those then travel through the prism, and when they get to the edge, they're going to have the same force. The gravitic field is going to be there to then cause them to curve again. Now, we're not going to talk exactly how that happens, but the idea is that when my father saw light curving, he says there's going to have to be a force, a second gravitic force. And I saw that through Borchert's neomechanics and the infinite levels of the universe, that we must have a gravitic field below, a gravitic field that causes the electron to go around the proton and the nucleus. We have the equation that looks exactly like an equation for gravity. And therefore, my father and myself came up with two very different directions and two different logical paths to come to the conclusion that there has to be two gravities in the universe. Some of you are thinking, David, electrons are charged particles and they don't orbit the nucleus in simple orbits like the moon and the planets. And you're right. But remember, the four universal motions happen at all levels, meaning there is not only G2 gravity, but there is also G2 magnetism, G2 electricity, and perhaps even G2 light. And those together allow for orbit clouds around the nucleus. But that's a discussion for another time.